Hello! Today we're going to take a closer look at the new ACER Nitro 16, which is a brand new variant of ACER's Nitro 5 series with a pretty decent 16:10 screen. The rest of the laptop is very similar to the common Nitro 5. This here is the cheapest version of the Nitro 16, which comes with a Ryzen 5 7535HS, an RTX 4050 140W, 16GB of DDR5 RAM with 4800 MHz, and a very fast 512GB M.2 SSD with around 5GB per second in reading and writing, fast Wi-Fi 6E, and a 230W PSU. PS, the vast majority of viewers aren't subscribed to my channel yet, so you know what to do. In this config, the laptop starts at around $1,199 in the US and €1,499 in Europe, which is way too much considering the performance in my opinion. It can be configured up to an RTX 4070 and a Ryzen 7 or an Intel i7 as well, which will raise the price to up to $1,900 and €2,100. But full disclosure, the price can be very different where you live, so always take laptop prices with a grain of salt. As you can see, the design of the ACER Nitro 6 is a bit unique with a hint of neon pink and blue on the cover amongst a new designed Nitro logo, which you can also find here, here and here. It's a full plastic case with a pretty wobbly screen and a hinge that, to be honest, didn't make the best impression. You can easily open it with one hand though. And it wakes up from sleep mode in around 2 to 3 seconds, which is not instant, but decent enough. It weighs 2.6 kg and the AC adapter weighs an additional 800 g, making a total of around 3.4 kg. It has a useful color-coded dedicated button that allows you to cycle through the 4 different performance modes: silent, balanced, performance and turbo. Whereas turbo is definitely way too loud while not delivering noticeable more speed than the performance mode. The fans turn idle on battery and eco mode, and also when plugged in on silent mode when the laptop is on idle. Watching YouTube on silent mode plugged in would cause the fans to spin up pretty fast and noticeable for a short moment from time to time. I've tested the benchmarks of Cyberpunk 2077 and Shadow of the Tomb Raider on ultra settings at the native 1200p resolution to compare the speed of the 4 performance modes. And my advice would definitely be to use the 2 middle ones, as turbo is just painfully loud and unnecessary as well. The laptop has 4 vents as well as a big grid at the top and the bottom. The display actually really surprised me. It's a 16:10 screen with a resolution of 1920 by 1200 pixels, 165 Hz and G-Sync with a superb latency of only 3 milliseconds if you turn on the overdrive. A really good maximum brightness of up to 429 nits and great color accuracy as well. I've measured it myself with a Spider X Pro. It will just do a great job for creatives and content creators. The keyboard has 4 RGB zones, which you can configure in the Nitro Sense app. Keyboard flex was decent and I was able to achieve a good writing speed, and it looks cool with the matte black keys and the white sides, but it sounds really cheap, like cheap clicky plastic. The touchpad is really big, but I never accidentally touched it while gaming. In contrast to the keyboard, it actually has a satisfying click feel and sound. The keyboard also offers a Nitro key to quickly access the Nitro Sense app, in which you can configure the performance modes. You can also fully manually adjust the fan speeds to your liking, which is nice. And it allows you to change the keyboard colors and modes. By the way, the keyboard will flash in the color of the performance mode when you change it. To be honest, the overall build quality is a bit disappointing, and laptops like the new Asus TUF models and the Lenovo Legion 5 surely have a better build quality. It's more comparable to an MSI Katana in my opinion. Okay, but we are getting a micro SD slot on the left side, which is rarely seen these days, as well as a USB-A 2.0 port, the LAN port and the 3.5mm audio jack. At the back we are getting 2 USB-C 4 ports with DisplayPort support, an HDMI 2 port and the power plug. On the right side we are getting 2 USB-A 3.2 ports and a Kensington lock. No Thunderbolt, since this unit has an AMD processor, but the connections can vary a bit on other models. The 2 downward-facing 2-watt speakers, They can get pretty loud, but the sound is really screechy on maximum loudness. And we also have the common lack of bass like on other gaming laptops in this price category. This is what the integrated camera looks like and the integrated microphone sounds like. The 80 Wh battery in the ACER Nitro 16 can provide really good runtimes, as the Ryzen 5 7535HS can become really power efficient. On idle with 20% brightness and Wi-Fi, I got a runtime of around 12.3 hours. Watching YouTube, I still achieved a very good 8.75 hours with 50% display brightness and headphones at 20% loudness and activated Wi-Fi. In gaming, I was actually getting around 60 to 120 minutes depending on the performance mode I was using. And gaming is absolutely possible on battery thanks to the efficient Ryzen 5. It's not as smooth as plugged in heavier games, but with some tinkering you can get a really good experience, and depending on the settings and the FPS cap, if you choose one, and the game, you can achieve up to 3 hours of gaming or even more if you're playing some lighter stuff. In Cinebench R23 I got up to 10,538 points on the multi-core and 1,479 on the single-core score. In PC Mark 10 I saw 6,700 plugged in and 4,100 on battery. The overall gaming performance is very similar to other RTX 4050 laptops with a tiny bit less FPS due to the Ryzen 5 in some games, but overall you'll be fine if you're not running into VRAM trouble on the RTX 4050 version of the ACER Nitro 16. I was testing Cyberpunk 2077 on ultra settings and DLSS quality at the native 1200p resolution, which resulted in around 67 FPS on average with a 1% low of 38 in a crowded area in the city center. Definitely playable, and frame times are okay as well. As you can see, most of the time the VRAM seems to be sufficient, and even when it hit the 6GB limit, there weren't any major frame drops. Of course, you could also use frame generation to get about 100 FPS instead. And to be honest, if I was using an RTX 4050, I would actually activate it. And of course, you could also tinker around with the settings a bit to get more FPS and a lower VRAM usage, or cap the FPS at any desired number, because on a G-Sync monitor, you don't need to reduce yourself to 60 FPS since the monitor would adapt its frequency to the FPS. But if you hit the display refresh limit FPS-wise, you should actually deactivate frame generation to avoid a high input lag. In God of War, I was testing high settings with DLSS quality on the native 1200p resolution and saw an average of around 88 FPS with a 1% low of 35. But in some areas the 1% low would be higher. I had some issues in this cutscene in the beginning. In this boss fight, the frame times were really good though, and the experience is very enjoyable. Ultra settings wouldn't be the best idea, as the VRAM limit would be exceeded, causing severe stutters and frame drops. And in PUBG, I was using the high preset and saw a relatively high average FPS of 121 and a 1% low of 58. It's basically running pretty well once the level and the shaders have loaded after a first match. No complaints here. The FPS might be a bit lower on other maps, as this smaller map wasn't the most demanding for both the GPU and the CPU. But for now, the 6 cores and 12 threads of the Ryzen 5 are enough to handle all games out there. Oh, and here's some footage in which I was playing Horizon Zero Dawn on high settings on battery, so the laptop was unplugged, and as you can see, it's still very playable. I mean, the frame times aren't as perfect as when plugged in, but you can avoid that by cutting the FPS to a certain extent. But it's actually really playable, as you can see here. And heavier games could be an issue due to the Ryzen 5 or the CPU being throttled down too much, but games that aren't as CPU intensive should be just running perfectly. All esport titles and most recent AAA games are perfectly playable on high to ultra settings as of now. While we're at it, I highly recommend checking out my RTX 4050 review video over here if you haven't already done that. And also the video in which I talk about the wattage issue of the RTX 4000 series. By the way, these are the 3D Mark results I achieved on the Nitro 16. Overall, the laptop is decent, even in its cheapest configuration. Its biggest flaw was the fan noise on turbo, which you don't need, and definitely the build quality of the chassis and the keyboard. And of course, it all comes down to the price, as always. For 1,000 bucks, this would be an awesome laptop. For 1,500 euros, it's not. And I don't think I would pay $2,000 or more, even on the highest configuration, considering the overall build quality and appearance. So make sure to check the current price if you're watching this before buying it. If you came here after buying it to get some confirmation, well, just enjoy your Nitro 16, it's fine. That's all for today. If you enjoyed the content, please consider subscribing and hit that like button as well. That helps a lot. Thanks for watching, see you next time, bye bye and tschüss.